Family asked me to give up my seat on a trip I had spent 8 months planning and fully paid for, so my sister's boyfriend of 6 weeks could come instead. I'm a registered nurse. I work 4 12-hour shifts a week at a hospital in Mississauga, and I have for the past 6 years. I don't say that to brag. I say it because I want you to understand what kind of person saves up for something like this. I meal prep on Sundays. I track my spending in a spreadsheet. I have a separate savings account I call my Sunday fund that I've been adding to since I was 23. A week at a luxury cottage in Muskoka, the kind with a private dock, a sauna, a fireplace in every room, that wasn't an impulse. That was 2 years of Sunday evenings, adding $150 at a time and telling myself it would be worth it. And it was going to be, until it wasn't. I should give you the background because without it, none of this makes sense. I'm the older of 2 daughters. My sister is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, we weren't close the way some sisters are. She was the fun one, I was the responsible one, and my parents never pretended otherwise. I was the one who got a part-time job at 16 to help with groceries when my dad got laid off. She was the one who got a new laptop for her birthday that same year. I didn't resent it then. I was young, and I thought that's just what families did. The ones who could carried the ones who couldn't yet. The problem is that some people never stop expecting to be carried. My sister met her boyfriend, I'll call him Kevin, at a concert in July. By September, she was talking about him like they'd been together for years. My parents loved him immediately. My mom called him the one, after meeting him twice. My dad shook his hand and said he seemed like a solid guy. I hadn't even met him yet. In October, I told my family about the cottage. I'd booked it for the week between Christmas and New Year's, peak season, which meant the rate was higher, but I'd been planning for it. 4 spots, me, my sister, my mum, my dad, a family trip. Something we'd never actually done before, not like this. A real trip, with a real kitchen and a real fireplace and a dock where we could sit in the cold and look at the stars. I was genuinely excited. I sent them all the listing. My mom cried a little on the phone. My dad said it was too much. I told him I wanted to do it. What I didn't say, because I didn't know how, was that part of me was hoping it would change something. That maybe a week together in a beautiful place would undo some of the distance that had built up over years of feeling like the family's contingency plan rather than one of its members. I should have known better. The call came in late November. My sister, she started with small talk, which is always a bad sign with her because she hates small talk, and then she said it. Kevin wanted to come. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. There are 4 spots, I said, 1 for each of us. I know, she said, but it's weird for me to be away from him for a whole week. We've never been apart that long. They had been together for 4 months. I mean, I said slowly, the cottage is booked for 4 people. There's no 5th room. We figured you could just stay home, she said. Kevin could take your spot. I remember the exact moment those words landed. I was standing in my kitchen, in my scrubs, still in them from a 12-hour overnight. I hadn't slept. I had been on my feet since 7 the previous evening. And my sister was telling me in the most casual voice she could manage that the trip I had spent 2 years saving for, had organized entirely, had paid for in full, should now become a romantic getaway for her and her boyfriend of 4 months, and I should simply not go. Mom and Dad know about this, I asked. They think it's a good idea, she said. We all just figured you're more of a homebody anyway. A homebody. I had booked the cottage. I was the one who called the rental office to confirm the sauna hours. I had already ordered a custom puzzle of the Muskoka landscape as a gift for my mum to do on the trip. I had a Spotify playlist called Cottage December that I'd been adding songs to since October. I said I needed to think about it and I hung up. My mum called 20 minutes later. She opened with, I know this is a lot to ask, and then proceeded to ask it anyway. Kevin had already put in his vacation days. Kevin was really excited. Kevin and my sister were serious, and it would mean so much to the whole family to have him there for the holidays. Couldn't I be flexible? Couldn't I be understanding? Didn't I want my sister to be happy? I said I would think about it. I said that twice more over the next 2 weeks whenever one of them brought it up. I was buying time, but I also genuinely didn't know what to do. Because there was still a part of me, the part that booked the trip in the first place, that wanted this to work out, that wanted my family to be the kind of family that didn't do things like this. Then my dad called. My dad is not a man who expresses things directly. He speaks in suggestions and implications, and you're supposed to understand what he means without him having to say it. He told me the cottage sounded like a lot of money for 1 week. He told me that Kevin seemed like a really good fit for our family. He told me that sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, and that I'd understand someday when I was in a serious relationship. I was 31. I had been in a serious relationship for 4 years that ended because I kept prioritizing my family over my own needs. But I didn't say that. What I said was, "Dad, I pay for this trip, all of it, my money." He said, "We know, and we appreciate it." That was it. That was the whole answer. I hung up and sat on my couch for a long time. It was a Tuesday night in early December, and it was already dark at 4:30 the way it gets in Ontario in winter, and I just sat there in the dark thinking about the Spotify playlist and the puzzle and the spreadsheet on my laptop with every line item from the past 2 years. And then I thought about something practical. I had booked the cottage on my credit card. My name was on the reservation. Most cottage rentals in Muskoka, and I'd read this in the fine print because I read all the fine print, require the card holder to be present at check-in with a valid photo ID and the original card used to book. It was a fraud prevention policy. It was standard, which meant that if I wasn't there, they couldn't check in. I sat with that for a few days. I didn't say anything to my family. They had stopped asking at this point, probably assuming I had silently accepted the arrangement, the way I had silently accepted every other arrangement they'd made at my expense over the years. I called my 2 closest friends. I'll call them my work friends because that's where I met them. 2 other nurses I've known since my first year on the floor. I told them what had happened. One of them laughed and then apologized for laughing. The other one said, "Tell me the dates, I'm in." I called the cottage rental office. I asked about their check-in policy, confirmed what I already knew, and then I asked whether it was too late to update the guest list. It wasn't. I swapped out 3 names. I kept mine. I did not tell my family. I know how that sounds. I want to be honest with you. Part of it was absolutely satisfaction. The comment someone made once about revenge, that people always claim it's not revenge, it's consequences, that lands, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the larger part of it was something different. It was finally, for the first time, making a decision based entirely on what I wanted, not what would keep the peace, not what would make my sister happy, not what would make my dad think I was understanding and flexible and low maintenance. Just what I wanted. What I wanted was to go to Muskoka. The week of Christmas arrived. My friends and I drove up on the 27th in my car with a cooler full of groceries from the Longos near my apartment and a bag of board games and approximately $4,000 worth of cheese. The cottage was everything the listing had promised, and then more. There was snow on the dock. The sauna worked. There was a fireplace in the living room, and we lit it the first night and stayed up until 2 in the morning talking about nothing. I had turned my phone to Do Not Disturb before we left the city. On the morning of the 28th, I turned it back on. 42 messages. The first few were from my sister, confused. They had arrived at the rental office the evening before and been told they couldn't check in without the cardholder present. She had tried to explain. The person at the desk was polite and firm. There was nothing they could do. Then my mum escalating. Then my dad, very quiet in a way that meant he was furious. Then my sister again, crying, asking me to please call the rental office and fix it. Then my mum calling me selfish. Then my dad saying we needed to talk. Then Kevin, who I had never spoken to in my life, texting me from my sister's phone to say that this was not a cool thing to do. I read all of them. I put my phone down on the cottage coffee table. One of my friends handed me a mug of coffee and raised an eyebrow. I shook my head. We went out to sit on the dock. The lake was completely frozen. There was no wind. It was one of those Ontario winter mornings where the sky is so pale and flat, it looks like paper, and you can hear nothing except the occasional crack of ice somewhere far off across the water. I sat there in my coat with my coffee, and I didn't feel guilty, and I didn't feel righteous. I just felt quiet in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I texted my sister one message. It said, "I hope you and Kevin have a good holiday. The cottage is fully booked." She called me 4 times. I didn't answer. My mom sent me a message that I'll summarize as, "You have ruined Christmas. You have ruined the family. You have always been difficult. You don't know how to give." My dad sent one message that said, "This was not the right way to handle this." That was it. That was the whole message. Kevin apparently had to book a last-minute Airbnb for the 4 of them, which cost significantly more than what I'd pay per person for the cottage, and which was, by my sister's account, much smaller and not nearly as nice. I stayed at the cottage for 6 nights. We made raclette on the second night using a kit I'd bought from a specialty shop on Yonge Street. We did a 1,000-piece puzzle, not the Muskoka one I bought for my mum, which I left at home, but a different one, of the Toronto skyline at night. We watched movies. We went for long walks in the snow. On New Year's Eve, we sat on the dock at midnight and watched someone set off fireworks from across the lake, and it was the kind of moment I had been trying to manufacture for my family for 2 years. It turned out the moment just needed different people in it. I got home on the 2nd of January. The first week back was strange. My sister didn't contact me. My mum sent one short message saying she needed time. My dad said nothing. It was like the family had agreed to collectively apply pressure through silence, which was its own kind of answer. It told me that no one was going to call and say, "We were wrong to ask that of you." No one was going to acknowledge what had actually happened. The plan was to wait until I felt bad enough to apologize. I've been thinking about that a lot since then. The assumption that I would be the one to come back. That I always come back. That I save and plan and give and eventually absorb whatever's taken from me and come back for more. That is not a character flaw they were exploiting. It was a pattern they had come to depend on. I'm not sure what the right ending to this is. I'm not someone who believes in burning things down forever. I love my parents, in the complicated way you love people who have also let you down in very specific and repeated ways. I think some version of a conversation will eventually happen, and I think some version of repair is possible if everyone is willing to be honest about what happened. But I'm also not going to be the one to make the first move this time. I'm 31 years old, and I just had the best week of my adult life with people who, when I said I wanted to book a cottage in Muskoka, said yes without a single condition attached. That's a new kind of math for me, and I think I'm going to keep doing it. I keep coming back to the moment I sat on that dock on the morning of the 28th, coffee in both hands, lake completely frozen, nobody asking anything of me. That silence wasn't empty. It was the first genuinely quiet moment I'd had in years, and it took me until I was 31 and sitting alone in the cold in Muskoka to realize I had been making noise for other people my entire adult life. There's a kind of honesty that only comes when the thing you were afraid to do is already done. Once I updated that guest list, once my friends were in the car and we were on the 400 heading north, something settled in me. Not triumph exactly. More like clarity. I had spent so long being the person who absorbed things, the requests, the assumptions, the casual expectation that I would step aside, that I had started to mistake that absorption for love. It wasn't love. It was just exhaustion that had gone on long enough to feel like a personality. What Kevin's arrival in my family's life exposed wasn't really about him at all. He was just the moment the pattern became impossible to ignore. My sister had always reached first and asked later. My parents had always smoothed it over by leaning on the one who would smooth the easiest. That's me. It had always been me. And the reason it kept working is that I kept letting it, because somewhere underneath all the meal prepping and spreadsheet tracking and someday fund contributions, I believed that if I was useful enough, generous enough, flexible enough, eventually the scales would tip and I would feel like I actually belonged in my own family. That's not a thought I'm proud of, but it's an honest one. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of that week, in January in my apartment, with a half-finished Toronto skyline puzzle still on my kitchen table, is that real integrity isn't about being the bigger person every single time. Sometimes it looks like knowing your own name is on a reservation and deciding to show up for yourself instead of disappearing so everyone else can be comfortable. That's not cruelty. That's just finally applying the same care to yourself that you've been extending to everyone else for years. The intelligence part of it, and I mean the practical, clear-headed kind, not cleverness, was realizing that I didn't need to argue or confront or explain. The situation already contained its own answer. The card holder had to be present. I was the card holder. I just had to decide to act like it. And the part that took the most out of me, the part that felt hardest in the weeks of silence that followed, was staying with that decision when my phone lit up with 42 messages and my mum's voice was in my head telling me I was selfish and difficult. Resilience isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like a speech or a confrontation. It looked like putting my phone face down on the cottage coffee table and going outside to watch the ice. I don't think my family is made up of bad people. I think they got used to a version of me that no longer exists, and I think the most honest thing I can do now, for all of us, is stop pretending she does.